Hello, Sabrina. Welcome back. Long time no see. It's been an Ontario summer since we've last chatted. Hope your summer's been good to you.
Yeah, it's been busy. As you said, it sort of feels like we're in unofficial campaign mode already. Never a dull
Hmm.
moment in Queen's Park. When the House rose for, a very extended summer, we're not coming back until October 21st. I thought it might be kind of quiet. I might get a little bit of a break. But no such luck. It's just been go, go, go at Queen's Park.
And that's kind of what we wanted to talk to you. I mean, we're I guess real world Ontario. We're getting back into the fall, which means back to school. Summer doldrums are over, and we all have to kind of get back to back to reality. Maybe not so much for Queens Park, but that's a different world unto itself. But something that Roll and I kind of talked about offline, and something we want to pick your brain about was the rumor mill is churning about a possible spring election, and we kind of seen evidence of that from the Ford government. There's been cabinet shuffles, announcements, that kind of thing. Won't really go into the details about that, but I want to know is maybe you can tell us, where have Bonnie and Marit been all summer long? I mean, it's been a news cycle after news cycle. There's been, LCBO strikes. There's been cabinet shuffles. There's been all sorts of stuff. I don't know where they've been. I don't know what they have to say on these matters. Um, Maybe you can enlighten us.
No, that's a really good question. And I think, you're not the only one probably that's wondering, where Marit and Bonnie are. I think it's just something that we've seen often, right, from these opposition parties, especially, the opposition parties to Doug Ford's government, is that they have a hard time getting their message out there and getting their message to stick. We have seen in the polls that Doug Ford and the PCs are still coming out on top. The premier has had his fair share of scandals and policy backtracks. There's healthcare woes, the notorious greenbelt reversal, but he's still, hovering around that, high 30s, low 40s, which is what he would need for a majority government. And so really this has been unofficial campaign summer, and Bonnie and Marit, there's no question period, they're not in the House. Bonnie doesn't have a seat, and so I think that is part of it, just being in summer mode. But you're right, we've seen Doug Ford at the podium very often making these splashy announcements, funding infrastructure, the kind of stuff that the electorate wants to hear, especially in campaign times. But Marit and Bonnie have been touring this summer. They've been going out to different areas in across the province. I know Marit has been around the Ottawa area. She's been up north, Southwest, Windsor, sort of those spots that the NDP lost in the last election and want to pick up again. And Bonnie has been doing the same. She's been touring a lot as well. They've both been, I guess, fundraising, not as much as the PCs, and Bonnie a little bit more than Marit. When it comes to fundraising events. But I think they're also sort of looking in their own house right now as we're talking about the possibility of a spring election. They've got candidates to nominate. They've got money to raise, and so I think they need to do more, maybe forward facing public stuff, so that the public can get to know them if there is an election. But they're also dealing with what's going on, the inside baseball stuff that we talk about, with getting their party actually mobilized and ready to go if there is a snap vote.
Well, I mean, I remember Bonnie Crombie was saying how their goal was to get all their candidates nominated, I think by the end of September.
Yeah, it was
And
actually half her slate,
okay.
around 60 candidates by September. They're having a convention on September 20th. They want to be, she wants to be on stage with a bunch of candidates, but that was a self-imposed deadline. It doesn't seem like it's going to happen. They only have two non-incumbents, locked in right now, and September. We're already in September now, so really, it doesn't seem like it's going to happen. It was a
Mhm.
self-imposed deadline, but it just seems to be this other thing where she's promising something and then failing to deliver on it. So probably not a good look, but maybe just a little inside baseball. I don't know if it's going to stick to her.
It won't stick, but I do question, like, Roll and I are kind of coming at this from an ex-staffer, ex-politico kind of point of view, and it these things can't just kind of be pulled out of the hat on a weekend and say, okay, let's go to the polls. Like it does take time to kind of build up your team and get because candidates need time to kind of go around, meet with Rotary clubs and not for profits and businesses and all that stuff. They could have used this summer to kind of hit up the barbecue circuit in their respective ridings and introduce themselves. They've spoiled that. And I'm actually just pulled up the website now, and they've got 9 candidates nominated. Most of them are incumbents. Um, and I kind of look at the NDP and the Liberals, and I'm looking at their south of the border, right? We saw Kamala Harris kind of come. This isn't necessarily related, but I'm looking at she kind of come out of nowhere. Joe Biden resigns. She's now the presidential choice for the Democrats, and it's completely changed the election in the states. And yet she's not relying on the press to do, the news conferences and the press releases and everything. She's doing a big social media campaign, just kind of letting her light shine. And I kind of look at that reflecting here north of the border. And I'm saying, well, where's Marit and Bonnie's kind of social media campaign to let people know who they are? What do they stand for? What, not just that they don't like what Doug Ford's doing, but what's their what's the reason to get up in the morning kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've actually been looking at, social media advertising for all the parties this summer in Queen's Park Observer. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but essentially the Conservatives, as with every aspect of, advertising, especially, they are outspending the other parties like by a lot. I mean, they have multi-million-dollar ad campaigns on TV, on radio, and also on social media, attacking Bonnie Crombie. And they actually seem to be working. There was a poll out today from Liaison that suggested that like around just over 20%, close to 30% have a favorable view of Bonnie Crombie, but more than 40% have an unfavorable view. And so I think that the ads might be having an impact on that. But they're also targeting her in the 905, which is, of course, where we would expect Bonnie Crombie and the Liberals to perform well. She's the former mayor of Mississauga. It's kind of like a swing region, and obviously there's a lot of votes up for grabs. It'll make or break you at Queen's Park. But you're right. They haven't. Even Marit's even been leader for quite a while now. I mean, she's still new-ish, but she came in last February, and so I think when we saw those liaison numbers, Marit, over 50% of respondents said they didn't know enough about her or didn't know, or weren't sure about her enough to make up their minds. And so I think that that's something that Bonnie Crombie, really the pressure is on her to do, because we've seen even the NDP attack her in the same like manner as the Conservatives, right? They're painting her as this out of touch, Trudeau loving elitist. And she really, she does have a good story. She's the daughter of immigrants. She has had like this night, like this come up story that I think would resonate with a lot of people in Ontario, but they just haven't done it yet. They have not told her story. They've not really pitched her in a way. And I think we'll probably start to see more of the advertising come out, the closer we get to the election, just because the other parties are not even raising, as much money as the Conservatives to be able to do that right now. They are getting a little closer, and there's still time for Bonnie to raise money. She's got this big leaders dinner coming up in December. Marit Stiles has actually been, raising more than the NDP is used to, and coming close to the Conservatives. But it's still just a huge gap. And so I think that's also the trouble of the opposition not being able to get their message across.
I mean, talk about fundraising. We're really talking about the central parties usually, and the central parties have more ability to kind of fundraise than the riding associations. And I did a sort of quick back of the envelope comparison of the riding associations in various parts of Ontario a couple of years ago now. And the difference between a PC riding association, which can pretty much raise all the money it's allowed to raise to use in an election in a single year, and there's the two ridings where Liberals are traditionally won. I looked at Liberals and the NDPs, and their annual fundraising was like less than $1,000. I mean, we're in the hundreds of dollars, and this was in a what should be considered a kind of key battleground. Do you think that the story of kind of the difference in financial income goes goes beyond even that kind of top level number that we see of what the leaders can actually raise.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I do think there's probably a lot at play there. I think especially the riding associations and the local organizers, they'll probably, and they are being told now, that we've got to push the fundraising because we're getting close to an election. So I feel like maybe non-election years, maybe you're not expecting to raise as much, but certainly I think the fire has been lit under all of them now. And don't forget, there's also a by-election happening right now in Bay of Quinte just to replace Todd Smith, and that means that the parties can technically sort of raise more than they're allowed to, because you can also donate. I believe it's 3,375 is the latest. It raises every year the limits, to also the candidate, and that is sort of like an extra chunk of change. So really, I think we'll probably see a lot of the parties use this by-election to bring in more money. But you're right, and it's sort of this tradition or maybe stereotype in this country that conservatives tend to be the party of like bigger donors. So people donating, thousands of dollars, and the NDP, and they're actually pretty proud of it. They're the party of like smaller donations, people giving like $25 here and there. And so I think that's something that we also see on the events, right? Like legally, all political parties have to post their fundraising events, within a certain timeline, give certain information, and so that's something I track in my newsletter. And you can tell that the PCs, they rarely have a fundraiser that's less than $1,000 cost of entry, whereas the Liberals are sort of doing those bigger ticket ones, but they're kind of been around like the 200 range, whereas the NDP they don't have as many of those events. They do a lot of online fundraising. So I think it's also like the approach that the parties take to fundraising as well. But at the end of the day, they all need money to run a campaign. Like it goes a long way, right? You can buy ads, you can go and tour the whole province, go to fly-in communities in the north. You got to buy pizza and coffee for your door knockers. So money, really goes a long way. And I would just add that this year is the last year of the taxpayer funded per vote subsidy that all parties get, from essentially us taxpayers. Yeah. And so that's been phased out while the donation limits are being raised, just to kind of offset things. And so really that's why we've seen, donation limits go past the $3,000 mark now, because the parties won't be getting, what is hundreds of thousands of dollars every quarter through this taxpayer funded per vote subsidy. So really, I think the money question is a big one a lot of parties are looking at right now as we get closer to a possible snap vote.
And so that's inherently going to cause fewer donors, but the donors that will donate will be wealthier. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on which party, right? You can donate more, but will people donate more? And so I think even for the Liberals, in some sense, like I think a lot of maybe, if we can just call them wealthier donors, people who have the means to give more to the parties, like I think initially, who is donating and donating to spend time to hang out with the third place Liberals right now. But I do think that as we're seeing in the polls, them sort of gaining traction and, I guess jockeying with the NDP for second place, I think we'll start to see them have a lot more donations, but also bigger ones too.
I guess, I mean, that whole picture of like why are the opposition parties so quiet? I tend to think comes down in large part to the fact that, well, they can't afford not to be quiet, and they're always keeping their powder dry for the writ period, because that's when they can actually just go and spend everything that they've saved up. But I mean, the other question is, I remember, again, when Joel and I were sort of in the within a particular party, that was in government at the time. Like, even when you're in government in Ontario politics, it seemed incredibly difficult to get any kind of message out, because the media just wasn't actually that interested a lot of the time. I mean, sure, there's the Queen's Park stuff, but the kind of stuff that the parties actually want to get out, the kind of good news stories, were quite difficult. And if you're in opposition, it's 10 times more difficult still. It's like, well, you're not going to get the media to cover the fact that Bonnie Crombie's gone to a fundraiser in, I'm trying to think of a place in Ontario now, in the
Thunder Bay.
Thunder Bay, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, who wants to cover that? But and I guess this is the genius of sort of modern populist politicians like Doug Ford, Trump, obviously, and to extent Polyev, is they create their own media environment. They keep, they by being outrageous, by being kind of, by willing to say things that actually annoys people and creates controversy, they get it into the media, and it's like this kind of playing it safe, being the responsible person in the room actually counts against you in modern politics. I mean, do you think that's something that has any sort of merit to it?
Yeah, totally. I mean, Doug Ford is just the kind of politician that eats up all the oxygen in the room. He's got this like bull in a china shop approach to his press conferences. I mean, just take the supervised drug consumption sites issue that's kind of been blowing up at Queen's Park, right? Like, he's held press conferences on this, and every day there's been headlines on it, for better or worse, right? And I do think the drug consumption site in particular, even though experts are telling us that this policy is going to lead to deaths, I think that Doug Ford is probably winning the political battle here, because for a lot of us that don't have a lot of interaction with people with addiction or people who are using these sites, that's who he's speaking to. And he says, anecdotally, I'm hearing from families who are worried about, finding needles while they're taking their kids to daycare. And it's like, that's something everyone can understand and get upset about. And so like Ford is just appealing to that, where the policy side of it, where we've got nurses and health experts saying, we can't be doing this, that sort of gets lost and muddled in it. But you're right. I mean, it's so hard for someone like Bonnie Crombie or Marit Stiles or even Mike Schreiner to just go be like a foil to Ford, right? Like, he's just kind of his own person. And really, I'll say, like, for better or worse, it's like that old saying, is there any such thing as bad press? Because some of these things really don't seem to stick to him. And he's also got, like a whopping majority right now. So I think a lot of people want, especially now when they're dealing with cost of living issues, they want someone that can help them. And they surprisingly don't really seem to be blaming Doug Ford for certain cost of living issues. A lot of that stuff is in the federal wheelhouse, but I think they want the powers that be, they want to be listening to them more. Like, what can you actually do for me? I'm going to listen to what you're saying rather than the opposition right now. So that's why I think closer to the election, it'll of course be easier. People will be paying more attention to politics in general. But yeah, it's really tough to be memorable personality. And when we compare it to the States, right? Like, you're right. We need our Kamala factor. And I guess that makes Ford the Trump, but
Well,
I don't know.
I was,
I don't know if he'll like that anymore, but yeah, I mean, there are parallels for sure.
yeah, and obviously Rob Ford, even more so. Uh, it's yeah. I mean, I remember the day that it was actually during a Liberal AGM, I think, that Doug Ford became leader, and obviously, whatever hotel it was in, there were TV screens, and it's like the minute he became leader, it's like the new leader of an opposition party in Ontario does not get that much coverage on television, but Doug Ford sure as hell did, and it's like, oh, we're in trouble, because it was just, you saw the cameras just swing. Yep, okay, away we go. Uh, but I guess the just lost my thread here for a second. It will come back to me. Just bear with me. But I mean, I guess a theme that Joel and I have discussed a few times is this idea that the opposition parties in Ontario, they're playing by kind of the old rules. Like, politics has changed. You need to do what it takes to get headlines, and that, if you don't want to be a kind of populist and a neo-Trump, then you've got to get your headlines some other way, and you've got to do it. Well, let's do it with policy, say, because like, even if you've got a policy that annoys a bunch of conservatives, at least you're getting headlines now, and maybe it's a policy that a bunch of your core voters, and hopefully some people outside your core vote, actually are attracted to. So there's kind of very safe politics where you never, really, has Bonnie Crombie talked about much policy? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not aware of much. has even Marit Stiles talked about much policy over the last few years, other than sort of traditional NDP talking points? Would they be better to say, okay, let's come out with something really bold, because then that will get headlines, because it will annoy people, but it will also please a whole bunch of other people.
Yeah, I think that's right. There have been, I mean, obviously I've got my nose to the ground at Queen's Park. So like there have been some policy announcements, if we form government, we're going to do this. One thing that is just off the top of my head, the NDP said that they were going to do what municipalities are calling for and create a standalone minister that's going to be dealing with homelessness and addiction and so that's one thing. But it's just sort of been piecemeal little things, nothing that's going to, grab headlines or get the everyday person who's not watching this as closely as we are to sit up and really say, wow, I really like that idea, or I really don't like that idea. But I think we will see more of that closer to the election. Like that convention that the Liberals are having on September 20th, that's going to be like a policy convention, and they've struck some panels to sort of do things, but they're still just in that drafting stage right now, and so I do think they need to get a move on. But it's also interesting because Doug Ford, I don't think, like, you kind of reminded me when back when he became leader of the PC party, like I don't think he's been the disaster that everybody thought he would have been, or that maybe some people and progressives were afraid of. There was that very first budget that he was forced to backtrack on because of all the backlash, and we have seen a lot of backtracks and a lot of scandals, but I think that he's framing it in a way that is like, the public is buying it. He's saying, well, I've learned my lesson. I saw the expert advice. I think that's probably going to get pretty old. That only works for so long. But I do think you're right that it's not so much about, putting Doug Ford down as opposition and saying, look at the state of healthcare, for instance. It's been 6 years of the Ford government. We need a change. I think it's also like you have to get, like, people vote for or against something. Normally, that's kind of what gets people out to the polls. And so I think that you kind of need to have something that people are really going to believe. You have to show your work and do it, because this back and forth, even with the Liberals, I don't know if Ontario is ready to get them out of the penalty box here. And so there has been kind of this theory, and there's something similar that happened in the 90s with David Peterson when he called a snap vote. That he was a Liberal premier, he called a snap vote. It backfired on him, and that gave us the only NDP premier, Bob Rae, that Ontario's ever had. So I think there is this theory where that could be an opportunity even for the NDP to step in and sort of out left or out progressive the Liberals and just go, really bold with it and say the liberal Tory, same old story, vote for us, the NDP. And I think that's the way that they can maybe get around this vote splitting thing that we have in this country, where the Liberals and the NDP tend to split the progressive vote, and that favors the Tories.
I think we do have to get into the governing party and let's talk about Ontario politics. So let's dive into Doug Ford. This summer, like, Doug Ford was in the headlines, and I can't think of a good time that he was in the headlines. Like, if you remember back at the start of the summer, we were going into what people thought was going to be a dry summer because we had the LCBO strike. And, I would have thought that was a disaster. That should have been a disaster for him because, we had the LCBO strike. It was like the May 2-4 weekend, I believe, or at least Canada Day weekend we're heading into. People should be stocking up for, barbecues and cottages and whatnot. And no, we couldn't. But he said, oh, no, but Loblaws and convenience stores will take over, and you can buy your beer and wine there. And people are posting images of like, no, they're out. Like, shelves are empty. And I thought this should be a disaster. Like, this should just be like people just take them to the wood chipper and say, you're out, you're done. But he didn't. Like, the polls kind of showed afterwards, he was like, yeah, I'm top guy. And part of me wonders if he saw that the convenience stores and Loblaws were not going to bail him out of this problem, and he had to change ship. But I know it's like 1 week after all these pictures were showing up on Twitter, all of a sudden that deal was found real quick, real fast. There's that. Now, you had the consumption sites. That doesn't, he seems to kind of be playing to his base on that, and I don't think it's a really big issue for most people. We're heading into the fall, people going back to school, and we now have to find a new minister of education at like the 11th hour, literally the week before kids are going back to school. And I'm wondering, what's your opinion on why does none of this stuff seem to stick? Like I don't get a sense that the Conservatives, the PCs, have a real plan for Ontario. It's kind of like, let's lurch from one idea to the other, and oh, this isn't working. Okay, well, let's reverse course. And it's kind of been their governing style for the last going on 8 years now. Why is none of this sticking?
I get asked that all the time, and I don't know if I have a good answer, but you're right. Like, he is literally Teflon premier. And I do think that, he also had the pandemic. I know a lot of us aren't even thinking about that anymore, but I do think that was a moment where a lot of people were like willing to forgive him for a lot of things. I do think that, backtracking on things that people don't like will work, if you can spin it the right way. But I also think that it's just because he has this ability to, like, speak to a person like one-on-one. And even when I just talk to, regular folks like at a coffee shop or something, what do you think of the premier? And they'll say, well, I think he's doing his best. And it's like, well, is his best really what you want? I think people feel like people seem passive to me. This is just anecdotal. So I think that also has that's also playing a part in things. But I do think it's one, not like necessarily how good Doug is at getting his spin and his framing across, which he does do. I mean, I also think the style of press conferences plays a part in that. This whole one question, one follow-up style that's been left over from the pandemic, it's not really conducive to like getting the truth out, but compared to like a scrum where you've got, a more back and forth with reporters. But it's also just comes down to like the opposition not being able to properly hold him to account in a way that people are getting ticked off about it enough that we're going to start seeing it in, public opinion polls.
Well, I mean, the biggest thing that I'm flabbergasted as to why Bonnie Crombie is silent on this. I really am. And I think it's just a real screw up on her part or her team's part, is that Doug Ford recently just came out and said basically wind turbines and solar farms are coming back, baby. He's basically reversed like the issue that he got elected on. He turfed out Kathleen Wynne, got elected on this issue of we're going to end the wind farms and all this green energy deals that the Liberals brought in. He said, I'm ending it. And most recently, Stephen Lecce, new Minister of Energy, just announced we're bringing it back and we're going to do it better than ever. And I'm sitting there going, are you kidding? Like, this is what you got elected on in the first place. And now you're coming back and saying, nope, we're doing a complete 180 on it. I know they're saying that the municipalities will be able to determine what goes where, but I'll wait and see how long that lasts, because the liberals did that and that didn't last too long for them. This is a perfect example. Like, he's changed nothing in the province, but he's getting all the credit for it. And the Liberals and the NDP are just kind of giving them a pass on it. And is that pretty much how we've done politics for the last 8 years in this province?
I mean, that yeah, on that depressing note. No, I do think you're right. And it's something we've seen from him before. Like, remember sex ed when he came to power
Yes.
saying
Yep,
we're gonna overturn that, and then he didn't, and he sort of lost the social conservative faction of his party there. They're still not happy with him about that. I don't know if it matters so much to Doug Ford. I don't think he even really needs that that part of the party right now to be successful, clearly. But you're right, and he has done this thing where if you look, what has he actually done? They love to say promise made, promise kept. And sure, there are some things they're going to like count every single penny that's been spent on to repair whatever bridge. But at the end of the day, when I speak to a lot of Tories, not necessarily like the Ford Nation people, even like small C conservatives, they are really disappointed. And they say, what is our legacy? We've had 2 mandates now of a whopping majority government, which is essentially carte blanche at Queen's Park. And what have we done with it? I mean, for better or worse, whatever you think about their policies, I can think about the Liberals and Kathleen Wynne, before she exited, a lot of things that have been reversed or maybe come back under a different name under Ford. But yeah, like the climate change or the Ontario retirement pension plan, sort of these big legacy moves. Cap and trade, sorry, is what I was thinking of. That maybe Doug Ford undid a little bit, but it's like what is Doug Ford doing that we're going to remember? And I think there are some potentials there. For instance, like the Ontario line, love it or hate it, that's gonna be a big change and something that I think more transit is better in general, and especially for voters too. But and he's also been making a lot of promises on housing, but it's like, where is the work for that? And so that's why I think next spring, if they're going to go to voters and say, well, promise made, promise kept, here's what we did, we need another mandate to keep going. I think that's where the opposition really needs to hit him hard on and speak in his language too. Like you said, like it's sort of just kind of this same style of politics, same approach to politics, but Doug Ford is not the same as everybody else. And so really you kind of have to meet him where he's at in order to take votes away from him. And I think Bonnie Crombie could maybe do that better than the NDP and Marit Stiles, because Bonnie has talked about being a centrist. Doug Ford has even kind of emphasized the progressive and progressive conservative. I mean, he's the biggest spending premier this province has ever had. And so I do think that if you want to go after like the centrist vote, that's maybe where Bonnie Crombie would go and maybe take some votes away from the PCs. But then you've got the NDP who can just go super progressive and then take away some of those votes from the Liberals. And who knows how it's all going to play out. But I think you're right. There's not a lot of big legacy stuff from the Conservatives right now.
And it seems that the last two Liberal leaders really got elected on, we need to go to the right. We went too far under Kathleen Wynne. We went too far left under Kathleen Wynne. We need to go to the right, still votes back from the PCs. And to me, that seems like a recipe for never unifying the progressive vote, which is really the problem we got here. It's exactly the same problem as the Conservatives had in the Reform era. Like, how do we unite the Conservative vote back into one block? Now, I'm not suggesting that the Liberals, the NDP merge or anything like that, but one way or the other, they've got to. When the Liberals have won, they've done it by minimizing the NDP vote more than they've done it by taking PC votes. I mean, certainly there's a bit of both. But the big chunk of voters that's kind of out there to grab are the NDP votes, it seems to me, and the votes that aren't going to shift are that kind of core PC, somewhere from center right to more the more conservative right. They just aren't ever going to shift regardless. They're just never going to vote Liberal, so don't even try to get those votes. So, I mean, are they just repeatedly making the same mistake of like ensuring that the divide in the progressive vote stays, so that those people who want a genuine progressive government are going to go, well, I'm going to vote NDP because there's no way I'm voting for a lightweight Doug Ford. Meanwhile, they can never take enough votes from the PCs to actually get anywhere close to forming a government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a good point, especially about taking away NDP votes, because even if you just look at the few by-elections that we've had in the last almost a year now, but maybe in the last like 9 or 10 months or so, we have seen in several cases that the Liberals are now overtaking the NDP and coming in second. Kitchener Centre went to the Greens, and that was the NDP's to lose. And so I do think that Bonnie Crombie as Liberal leader has probably been the worst for Marit Stiles. Even that liaison poll today that I mentioned, the Liberals had overtaken the NDP too. But I do think that, yeah, that's sort of what I was saying about Doug Ford not being this disaster that maybe people thought. So maybe those folks that are, in the center, maybe Liberal or conservative, depending on how they're feeling that election, maybe they won't vote for Bonnie Crombie if they think, well, things are going okay with Doug, things are going fine for me, so I'll vote for him. But maybe they would also say, well, let's try her out. And I do think that that's where Marit Stiles can really go very left and say, we're just completely giving you something different. But I don't know if she's done that enough, and I don't know how much she will do it. I know Andrea Horwath had gotten in trouble from her own party members, like the more activist side wing of her party, when she sort of went to the center in the hopes of being more appealing to a broader electorate in Ontario. Yeah. This is, I
Well,
think at the end
and
of
I,
the day, right or left,
I,
it's like just comes down to policy, right? Like, what do people want? And that's something that I think Doug Ford and, Doug Ford whisperers are very good at. I'm just thinking of fourplexes really quickly. Like, that's something that people say, allowing them as of right across the province would, help us get this desperately needed housing. But and Bonnie Crombie, sort of got this hint that Doug Ford might greenlight fourplexes. And then she said, we're going to do it. And then Doug said, we're not going to do it. And from what I hear, a lot of what the Conservatives are hearing and seeing in their polling is that fourplexes are not popular. We know who they're not popular with, but those tend to be people who vote and can make a difference at the polls.
yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, unfortunately, with the whole housing file, it's like anything you do is going to create a revolution of resistance from the same core of kind of voters who don't want their neighborhoods messed up. So whether it's we want high rises downtown or we want fourplexes in missing middle areas, both of those things are going to piss off that same voter group. Anyway, that's by the way. But I mean, thinking like if the Liberals look back at the last election they actually won, and which is the Kathleen Wynne election in the 2014, I forget now, so long ago. Yeah, 2014, which is very much against everybody assumed at that point the Liberals were like, okay, you're done. You can change your leader if you want to, but that's not going to save you at this point. You've had your Dalton McGuinty, you've had your gas plants, you're done. And I mean, I can tell you, as someone sort of working within the party, that I think many people in the party were as shocked as anybody else. Like, we not only did we win, we got a majority. I mean, I was, could not be down with a feather when it was a majority. It's like, so what was it that won that election for the Ontario Liberals? Was probably the most progressive agenda that a Ontario Liberal government had ever gone to the electorate with. At the same election as the NDP under Andrea Horwath ran to the right, thinking that they had a chance of like actually either getting into second place or doing something significant. And as they went to the right, they lost votes. And as the Liberals went to the left, they gained votes and unified the progressive vote. Now, obviously, I've got my own agenda here that I'm I'm just putting my own argument. But do you think I'm right?
No, I do think it's interesting. And I think now that you say it, it's like, who's going left? Like, maybe a lefty liberal is more centrist than a lefty dipper. But yeah, and I do know, and you're right, because it wasn't only just like the Liberals' policy then, it was also like who was leading them, right? And I think having a woman in Kathleen Wynne, someone who called herself a social justice warrior, an openly gay premier, I think that's also exciting. And now you're making me think about what's happening south of the border, where maybe Kathleen Wynne was this injection of joy or hope or those things that we hear, in US politics. And I don't think Bonnie or Marit have exactly been that. Not like there's not enough time for them to do it and change it around, but you're right. And I do think that was how people were feeling around Kathleen Wynne and the Liberals too. So I think like she was also the factor in pulling that off.
I see we're coming up on our time for this episode, but I do want to get in one last question. And we're looking at an Ontario provincial election, presumably in the springtime. We'll see how it goes. But I'm looking at Bonnie Crombie and Marit Stiles, and I'm looking at how, just like we said, where have they been all summer? And I'm thinking, like, where have they been kind of all this time? And I want to ask you your opinion. In politics, as in life, first impressions matter. And I'm wondering, did Marit Stiles and Bonnie Crombie blow their first impression with Ontario voters? Because I don't really know. We are all politically astute and politically aware and plugged in. I don't know what they are about. I don't know who they are, other than the fact that they don't like Doug Ford. But who are Bonnie Crombie and who are Bonnie Crombie and Marit Stiles? And I'm just wondering, did they blow that chance to make a good first impression with Ontario voters?
I think a lot of Ontarians are probably wondering the same thing too. And that's kind of like because of what we've all been talking about. They don't have the cash or the means, the resources, even a solid message that can go against someone like Doug Ford right now. But I don't know if they've completely flubbed it. I think people are, especially nowadays when like cost of living is top of mind for pretty much everybody. I don't know how closely people are paying attention to politics beyond, what actually impacts them. Maybe they can't find their wine at the grocery store, but really, I think there is still time to turn it around. A couple months is like a lifetime in politics. Someone smarter than me once said, like, voters have the memory of a goldfish, and so I think that there's still a chance for them to turn it around, but they haven't really. Maybe they're just saving their strategy to make it like to really go hard and go big, but they haven't really shown any signs of that. So I think that time is ticking and they need a bit more urgency. And I know first impressions go a long way, but you're right. Marit Stiles didn't even have a contested leadership contest, so there wasn't much coverage about that when she became leader of the NDP. And the Liberals, got a bit more coverage, but I think after that, people sort of tuned out. And while Bonnie Crombie had a lot of headlines at the beginning, that has sort of fizzled out too. But at the end of the day, there's still time to turn it around. They've just got to start doing it.
Which comes back to why didn't she run in Milton, I feel. But if she'd run in Milton, headlines at least. I mean, okay, you're taking a risk, you're taking a gamble. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe she would have lost.
She
But
didn't want the bad headlines. Well, I mean, we
well,
went to
yeah,
PCs,
but it's like you can't if the leader doesn't have faith in the leader, who else is supposed to have it?
Well, I mean,
I have heard she's running in Mississauga Center, though. She's like looking at a couple of different spots around there.
well, but that's
Um,
that's not a that's every news like in an actual election, she's going to run in Mississauga. The idea, like I always thought that your party is in third place. You don't even have party standing in the legislature. You need every seat you can get. Why are you not the general on the front lines, rallying the troops and saying, I am in this, I am gonna win, and prove that you're winnable. It's not about, like it's not about the policy at this point. It's just saying, I can win. And I'm kind of like, you don't really have a lot of options to be strategic here, because I'll be honest, I think the polls are showing that whatever they're doing isn't working at captivating the Ontario imagination, or to having Ontarians say, what's going on over here? Because I am looking south of the border, and I look at what's happening there, and within like one weekend, the Democrats have completely changed the shape of that election. They've changed the momentum. It's in their favor, and they haven't even released any policy. They haven't done any sit downs with media or press conferences. They are just doing social media and letting Tim and Kamala be Tim and Kamala, and it's working. And I question, why doesn't Marit or Bonnie do the same thing here? And the more that they don't do it, the more questions like, do they even want the job, or are they even likable enough to vote? And that might be a whole other episode, but we don't have time for that. But Sabrina, I want to thank you very much for coming on, taking the time to come on and share your insight with Queen's Park. As always, it's been a pleasure. And yeah, we'll do this, I'm sure, within the next few months, no doubt.
yeah, I'm sure I'll be back very soon.